Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this IIRF webinar. The topic today is the UK-India Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, and along with that, a Vision 2035. And for this webcast today, we couldn't have a better speaker. We have Commodore Anil Jaisingh, retired, who has a distinguished service in the submarine arm of the Indian Navy. He has, amongst other posts, been the naval advisor in the Indian High Commission in London. So he's eminently suited to speak on this topic. Currently, he works as a consultant to defense companies and is the vice president of the Indian Maritime Foundation. Sir, welcome to this webcast. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, and thank you very much for inviting me to this webcast. I'm quite looking forward to discussing the subject, which has grabbed headlines in the last few days and is quite a breakthrough move on bilateral, sort of building on the bilateral relationship between our two countries.
Sir, now the first thing I'd say is that there is talk of having a number of other agreements in the financial sector. And along with the CETA and the Vision, how do these portend for long-term economic relation of the two countries?
You know, I think this CETA, which has happened after 4 years or 3.5 years of very protracted discussions. There have been 14 rounds of negotiations. I think so. They must have, gone through every line, read between the lines, gone through every point threadbare. Both countries have looked out for what their interests are. And finally, they've been able to converge on common interests, which benefit both countries. And we've had this CETA. So obviously, it's a very important document. I see this as an important document from another perspective. You know, for the UK, they have entered a free trade agreement with perhaps the largest consumer market in the world and the fastest growing large economy in the world. So obviously, it offers a very attractive market for UK products with lower tariffs or duty-free, as most of the items will become over a period of time. Similarly, for India as well, although we do share a positive trade deficit or a trade surplus with the UK, it gives our industry, our industry is now growing, it's becoming globally competitive. It's being able to deliver world-class products. It needs that breakthrough, that catalyst to project it into the global market. I think this will be the opportunity where they will be able to go into the British market, which is a discerning market. It's not only a market which is restricted to Britain, but British, goods in Britain are seen by many as sort of good quality and of good standing. So I think it will give our industry and our young industrialists, our entrepreneurs, an opportunity to showcase their products in the global market and become part of the larger global ecosystem, which perhaps, the general perception about India being a third world country has prevented them from doing so far in many areas, particularly when it comes to, high-end research, technology, science, etc. So that's one part of it, so that it benefits both countries. The amount of effort that has gone into this, and I think the very fact that this is now even found mentioned in the Strategic Defense Review and the National Security Strategy of the UK, means that this is something they look at very seriously. And I think if both sides follow this CETA in letter and in spirit, and that's the most important part, it's very easy to write down these things, but that momentum has to be maintained. I think this arrangement, this free trade agreement has tremendous potential. A second issue, I think, where this will be of great benefit to both countries is, the multilateral trade system seems to be facing a lot of headwinds. The WTO, President Trump's protectionism, Chinese protectionism. So in this sort of environment where a protectionist regime is coming in and people are more worried about their products, keeping them within, not wanting to sort of compete with the world, this free trade agreement gives us a sort of first mover advantage. We have it now with the UK. Hopefully, we should have one with the EU by the end of the year. Now, between the UK and the EU, this offers a huge market for India. Yes, if you combine the two economies of the EU and the UK, they're more than the American economy. We are also negotiating a trade agreement with America, with the US. Of course, there are many other factors which are now sort of affecting this. But I don't see a long-term damage to that. This is more, transactional, more sort of immediate. So I think India has gained the first mover advantage in this sort of bilateral trade agreement scenario, India is all for multilateralism, but obviously not when its own interests are going to be adversely affected. So this, I think, for both sides, this CETA is a great breakthrough. And because of that, I think it has the potential to transform the existing Indo-British bilateral relationship across many other sectors, not only trade and the economy. And I hope that this will maintain the momentum and continue to deliver what it promises.
Thank you, sir. Now to come to a more specific, since specific question, and since it's your domain, the Vision 2035 has provisions on maritime security. It talks about enhanced cooperation under the IPOI and want to establish a regional maritime security center of excellence. Now, of course, as you know, Vice Admiral Chauhan categorizes India's maritime neighborhood into immediate, proximate, extended, and strategic neighborhood. The UK falls into India's strategic neighborhood. The IPOI essentially is a voluntary, non-treaty-based initiative, and it has 7 so-called pillars. And several countries, both from within the region and further afield, have some role in it. And UK and India both handle maritime security. And of course, as we've all been attending the IPRD held by NMF, each pillar of the IPOI is being covered by one subsequent successive iterations of the IPRD. Now, the one thing is that, do you think the IPRD, given that it's more sort of like a voluntary agreement, do these commitments in Vision 2035 really amount to much, or are they just, or is it maybe not of great relevance?
If you look at the larger picture of the Indo-Pacific, I think the shift in the global center of gravity from the Euro-Atlantic to the Indo-Pacific, with 60% of global trade traveling to this part of the world, 2/3 of the global GDP being generated here, 2/3 of the world global population residing here, it is inevitable that European countries will gravitate towards this part of the world and would like to definitely create or ensure that there is a security architecture there which sort of provides the safety and security they need for their trade to travel across. They're probably not interested in the military kinetic aspect of the security dimension, but more the non-traditional threats and ensuring a rules-based order, a free and open Indo-Pacific, etc., etc. So I think all countries, you look at France, you look at Germany, you look at Italy, all of them are slowly increasing their presence in the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific. They may not have the capacity right now to have permanent deployments there, but they do periodically send ships. For example, there's a British carrier task force right now, as we speak, in the Indo-Pacific on a 7-month deployment. It's already done an exercise with the Indian Navy. It's now going on to Japan. It's going on to South Korea, etc., Australia. With this task force are also embedded ships of other navies, including Spain. So it's a sort of, while it's a British task force, carrier task group, there is an element of other navies as well. So I think this is going to be the shape of things to come in the future. There will be presence of navies coming in from that part of the world who will come and reinforce the existing naval force structures, but they will not be a permanent presence. However, when it comes to something like the IPOI, now you specifically talked about the IPOI, I think the IPOI was always meant to be the kind of structure it is. It's not a structure that is not shaped into a formal mechanism. It was never meant to be a formal India-led mechanism. India just sort of initiated this at the East Asia Summit and then left it to countries to decide what they wanted to do in the 7 pillars. The important aspect with that is India and UK both are part of maritime security. And I think that today, in my view, every activity in the maritime domain is underpinned by security, maritime security. So maritime security becomes the key to any activity that's happening in the maritime domain anywhere in the world. Because of the, first we used to only look at the traditional threat. Now we have the traditional, the non-traditional, the transnational, climate change. There's a wide spectrum of threats at sea. And kinetic, non-kinetic, non-contact, contact, all kinds of maritime security has a role to play now in this. So I think from that perspective, the UK has chosen to be part of the maritime security pillar, because notwithstanding whatever sort of, we tend to think that the Royal Navy is no longer the kind of force it was. It's no longer a force to reckon with. But let me tell you, having served there for 3.5 years and having seen the Royal Navy operate closely, it's got tremendous institutional strength because of its long history and long traditions. And as I always said, even at that time, do not look at the Royal Navy by the number of ships it has. That is not a decision it took. That's a political decision. What you have to see in the Royal Navy is, what does the Royal Navy, what all is it able to do despite having so few ships? That is what you have to see. And you find that in that, the Royal Navy comes out very positively. So I think we both stand to benefit from that. There are certain naval technologies that the Royal Navy can offer us. We can learn a lot in interoperability. We can have logistic arrangements with them. When I was there, we used to have exercise Konkan has been going on for a long time. Most of the time, the exercise Konkan used to happen in Indian waters. While I was there, we sort of took it to the next level. We started having alternate Konkans, one in Indian waters, one in European waters, because we said our Navy must also get an exposure to that part of the world. We must show that we have the reach and the legs. So in 2009, when the Western Fleet came over, it was very gratifying to see that all the 4 ships that came, and they were big ships, INS Delhi, INS Brahmaputra, INS Byas, accompanied by INS Aditya, the tanker, all 4 were Indian-made ships. And this was something that I highlighted at every presentation I made, that the complete Western Fleet, which is coming now to Portsmouth, comprises ships which have been built in India. I think that was, and when these arrived, even the Brits, the Royal Navy officers who came, were quite surprised to see, the size of Delhi, the size of Brahmaputra, the size of Aditya, and to know that these ships were built in India. So I think maritime security is an important element for India and UK to cooperate on. UK has a contribution to make. It is still not a small navy. It is still a blue water navy. It has SSNs, it has aircraft carriers, and so it can definitely reinforce the existing maritime security architecture in the Indo-Pacific, even if the carrier battle group comes once in 2 years or once in 3 years. They do always have at least 1 or 2 ships present in the Indian Ocean. It's not that they don't have a presence over here. Coming to the second part, I think you were talking about the Maritime Center of Excellence. When you already have an IOR, IFC, etc., how useful will a regional maritime center, maritime security center of excellence be? I think any such organization which is set up has something positive to offer. It doesn't necessarily have to duplicate the IOR, IFC. It can look at other aspects of maritime security. For example, there's a MARSEC COE in Istanbul. That doesn't do only information sharing like the IOR, IFC does. It does a lot more besides that. They have seminars, they do run courses for other NATO navies. I have lectured over there once, many years ago. So on the Indo-Pacific. So I think any such initiative where you're trying to build this naval capacity or maritime security capacity is a welcome step. So let us see how it shapes up. Let us see what the RMSC actually becomes. But at least it's a thought that has been given. It's something that's been put on paper. So there will be some moves towards that. And perhaps over the years, it will evolve into what we would like it to be, maybe a few years from now. So I think it's a good step forward. And I'm sure they must have thought it through to some extent before putting it down on paper.
Yes, sir. You see, the other thing is, scholars often suggest, and everybody suggests UK has closer ties with the Indo-Pacific. This is mentioned
UK has?
Closer ties with the Indo-Pacific, sir. The recently promulgated National Security Strategy mentions this. Now, in UK, as you know, since we've all been there, the House of Commons select committees have a lot of weightage and they're high influence. And it's almost like if a politician or anyone is summoned by select committee, it's treated as they are summoned by House. So the 2023 report, the Defense Select Committee expressed doubts about the Indo-Pacific till. A major concern was the lack of a fighting force. In addition, the Public Accounts Select Committee is concerned about depletion of stockpiles due to the Ukraine war. The Defense Select Committee suggested the partnership principle. There have been suggestions for a Pacific grouping of 7, consisting of the Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere Quads plus the UK. There are, of course, other groupings. So, will these groupings amount to much, or they are not? They wouldn't really be significant.
Firstly, coming to your first question about the select committee's recommendations or observations, the UK certainly, like I mentioned, does not have the kind of presence it had a few years ago. It has a limited it has a limited capacity to be present in the Indian Ocean. We're all aware of that. But in 21, they sent a carrier strike group. Now in 25, they sent a second carrier strike group. Maybe this could become more frequent if the requirement exists in the future. But the fact is, they still have the power projection or the reach to come and operate for 7 to 8 months, 5,000 miles away or 7,000 miles away from their home waters. This speaks well of that Navy and its ability and to sort of their resilience, their capacity, their ability to operate and with other navies. So I think if you take all that into consideration, notwithstanding the fact that they don't have those kind of numbers anymore, they are still not. They're still a force which cannot be disregarded. And if they are able to provide some sort of support, particularly in a future scenario where push may come to shove, where there may be a major sort of great power contestation that may happen, presence from the so-called like-minded democracies as a larger presence would be beneficial towards maintaining a rules-based international order, which the other side wants to upset or reorient into one with their own characteristics. So from that point of view, I think the Royal Navy's presence would be welcome. We can't expect much more from them at this point of time, that there'll be a permanent presence or there'll be a very substantial presence like the US is. But certainly, yes, it will benefit the region for them to be here. And don't forget, for the UK, Indian Ocean was for the lake for them. It was a British lake. So they have very strong cultural, social, ties and institutional memory of this part of the world. So it is but natural that they would be interested in what's happening here. Like I mentioned, the global geopolitical center of gravity is shifted to this part of the world. The economic, every economic activity is now moving to this part of the world. Most of the large shipping is happening here. Most of the trade is coming to this part of the world. So it's but natural that any country, any trading country, and that too Great Britain, which is an island, would definitely have to have a stake in ensuring the security, if not of the others, at least of its own interests in the region. And therefore, their presence is and will be required in whatever manner and measure they can provide it.
But specifically, are these groupings a good idea?
Yeah, groupings are a good idea. I missed out on that part. If you take into account the fact, if you take an organization like the Quad, let's take the Quad as an example. There have been many people who've criticized the Quad, said it's not fit for purpose, it's not done what it's supposed to do. Countries like India are not calling out China, etc., etc. But if you put all that aside, the Quad today is a fairly effective grouping. It is doing a lot, besides, of course, the maritime security dimension and keeping a free and open Indo-Pacific, maintaining a free and open Indo-Pacific. There are many other activities the Quad is involved in. And I think overall that is beneficial to the region. They've also recognized ASEAN centrality. So, ASEAN, which was a little resentful of the Quad earlier, has also accepted the Quad. The Quad navies are working much closely together in interoperability is improving. So I think if you look at these sort of mechanisms, they have their own benefits. And from the Quad, what is actually really of advantage has happened are the bilaterals and trilaterals that have come up. These bilaterals and trilaterals between the 4 members of the Quad and neighboring navies would perhaps not have happened in the manner they have happened had the Quad not been there. The Australia, France, India trilateral, the Australia, Japan, US trilateral, the Australia, Japan, India trilateral, the Australia, Indonesia, India trilateral. So these are all mechanisms which are actually, in my view, have come out because of the kind of sort of architecture the Quad has created over here, or the kind of network the Quad has created. So these countries have come on board in various other ways. So I think from that point of view, if you see, I think these kind of regional groupings, small groupings, bilaterals, trilaterals, minilaterals, are very beneficial towards actually delivering on their objectives, because the convergences are more, there are less people involved, and so they're able to deliver results.
Sure, because when you talked about France, so really this brings in both the Quads, the Northern Hemisphere Quad and the Southern Hemisphere Quads. One more thing, what you said about cultural links, you see, New Zealand and Australia to this day are dominions. And for that matter, half of the Indo-Pacific, including Malaysia, Brunei, are all Commonwealth countries.
That's right.
And so is most of Oceania. So certain underlying commonality, which could even be extended to the eastern coast of Africa, does exist. And of course, there are staff college exchanges and many software exchanges are still there between these
And the
countries.
Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is still there. Whatever, for whatever, I mean, it doesn't have a security agenda, but it's there. It's a grouping of nations who are willing to talk to each other.
Well, yes, sir. Okay, the other thing which again is important, because the current Vision 2035 promotes strategic and defense industry collaboration through the adoption of a 10-year defense industrial roadmap and a joint mechanism at a senior official level to monitor its implementation. Now, the National Security Strategy mentions the CETA and Technology Security Initiative. The entire aim seems to be towards sharing defense technology. And SDR also talks about closer ties with India. Again, in terms, and they talk about the February UK-India Defense Partnership. The House of Commons Select Committee again wants to have closer ties with India, specifically to reduce dependence on Russia. And one thing they are willing to now suggest in the UK is government-to-government contracting. One is, to what extent is the UK really looking at India as a market for defense production, a market for its ammunition and weapons?
So there are 2 or 3 dimensions to this. The first dimension, in my view, is that the UK has always looked at India as a potential market. Unfortunately, for various reasons, it has not been able to break into the big league with India. So its defense exports to India have languished around the 3%, 4% mark and haven't really crossed that in the recent past. I think the last major procurement from the UK was the Hawk. I don't think we bought anything from the UK after that. Before that was the Seeking helicopters, etc. But after the Hawk, I don't think we bought anything substantial from the UK. As I mentioned earlier, there was or is a hesitation on transfer of technology from the UK to India. There was. Perhaps now that will change with the TSI, with the Technology Security Initiative. Because the Technology Security Initiative has identified 7 areas where India is very, very, very keen to move ahead and move ahead fast. And UK does have cutting-edge technologies. UK's science and technology capability is still very formidable. So I think if we are serious about TSI and actually being able to talk to each other and share technologies, particularly in these cutting-edge areas like AI or quantum or telecom or metallurgy, etc., this will be a great breakthrough in this sort of cooperation, and it will be a very long-term cooperation. Now, that I'm talking from a perspective of the larger sort of picture. When we come to the nitty-gritty of defense equipment, I think this DPI, which has been set up in February 25, is a very positive thing again, because a special organization, a special office has been created just with the specific purpose of improving defense cooperation between the UK and India. And it's already got 2 contracts, or 2 contracts are being negotiated or spoken about. One about the laser beam guided manpad, and I think one is about smaller surface air-to-air missile, the ASRAM. And companies have been identified. Thales UK and BDL are talking to each other on these. So that means there is something substantial moving ahead. Now, India has become a little more, India also is now not just a buyer. India is seeking to become a builder, whether it be components, whether it be equipment, whether it be ships or bigger equipment. So India will demand far more technology and far more indigenization than it has ever done before. And now it is no longer just satisfied with what we used to call screwdriver technology, manufacturing TOT. Now it wants deep technology. And I'm sure before putting this down, before the TSI must have been decided upon and this DPI would have been put into place, all these things would have been discussed. And I'm sure the Indian side must have made very clear to Britain what it expects in terms of technology from that country. And there is a lot of good technology in that country. 2 areas on which I can talk about are, one is, of course, the electric propulsion. Now, India has been mulling electric propulsion for its ships for the last maybe 25 years. I've been hearing about we are going to do electric propulsion. We are debating electric propulsion. The smaller ships will have electric propulsion. We will go for electric propulsion. So when I went to the UK way back in 2006, electric propulsion was being spoken about at that time. And when I met a few industries which are dealing in electric propulsion, they had that feeling of deja vu. Oh, one more attaché has come and one more guy is talking about electric propulsion. India is not serious. This was 19 years ago. So, and we are still talking electric propulsion. Another thing which over the years, which I found was very strange, was that when the UK was building its 2 aircraft carriers, the Queen Elizabeth and the Prince of Wales, they were meant to be 65,000-ton aircraft carriers with electric propulsion. India was also at that time contemplating the indigenous carrier number 2 to be a 65,000-ton carrier with possibly electric propulsion. But the Indian side and the UK side were not talking to each other on this. We were talking to the Americans. We had a joint working group with them, whereas they make nuclear-powered aircraft carriers of 100,000 tons with EMALs and all the bells and whistles which we can't afford, which I used to find very strange. And I used to bring this up very often. However, notwithstanding that, later on this discussion did start. Of course, we put the aircraft carrier on the back burner now. But electric propulsion is something the Brits have very successfully implemented in their large platforms, their medium platforms, their small platforms across the board. And it's something that India has been looking at very seriously. So I think this is something that is a sort of low-hanging fruit, if I may put that, if I may use that term, to kickstart this sort of co-development, co-production, co-design on these kind of elements. The second aspect is, another thing which I think you spoke about is setting up a land-based test facility for the future LPDs, which India will procure. And they want to do this by 2030 is what I read somewhere. Now, the LBTS, UK, the Royal Navy has been using a land-based test facility for their ships for a long time. They had one for the Daring class. They had one for the Type 23s, which I visited just off Portsmouth. And this I was very keen at that time that India should look at something like this. And so whenever, a senior flag officer used to visit from India, I used to try and arrange a visit for them. Admiral Kannan, I took Admiral Kannan there. I took a couple of other admirals there as well. And India was very keen at that time. And these admirals were very keen that, yes, this is a very good facility. But somehow it didn't gain the traction it should have gained at that time. And if it is doing so now, I'm glad it's happening, because this is something that saves a lot of training time on a platform. And because it saves training time on a platform, it reduces the wear and tear on the platform. And so it is a useful facility to have. And I'm glad they're talking about these two elements in the immediate future. But there are many other areas, particularly if we start working together in areas like quantum, unmanned technologies. UK is very good at autonomous technologies, autonomous and unmanned technologies on the surface and underwater. We should be talking to them a lot more about that. So these are the areas, I think, as we move ahead with the TSI and this industrial partnership, we'll be able to talk design and development, we'll be able to talk co-production and co-development. And that is something that is very positive. But like I said, the momentum has been set. This momentum, now it has to be maintained and it has to be followed in letter and spirit. That's the bottom line actually for this entire TSI.
Right, sir. Sir, another thing is, one is that you yourself have written a chapter in our IIRF strategic yearbook last year on underwater domain awareness. Now, do you think India and UK, there's much effort about cooperation in UDA, and that there are already existing groupings doing that? So how important is UDA? Because it's been specifically mentioned.
UDA is something that we should be paying a lot more attention to than we are. We seem to use this, we use a term called Maritime Domain Awareness, MDA, which is becoming very popular. And often it is said that UDA is a subset of MDA. Actually, in my view, UDA is MDA, because Maritime Domain Awareness does not mean on what is on the surface of the sea. It means what does the sea have? What do the oceans have? We have given a military connotation to MDA and said, okay, if you're able to track a ship on the oceans, if you're able to track a fishing fleet, or if you're able to catch some non-traditional activity happening, security challenge, that's MDA. That is not MDA. Surveilling the surface of the sea is not MDA. That is situational awareness. If you want MDA, UDA are one and the same thing. You've got to understand what is below the surface of the water, what is below the surface of the sea. And this is absolutely critical, particularly when you're going to be operating submarines. And that is why you see a preponderance of Chinese research vessels hanging around the Indian Ocean, because they're trying to understand the hydrology of the Indian Ocean. And therefore, if tomorrow we need to have, and I'm talking only from a military perspective, I'm not talking from a scientific perspective or a research perspective. If tomorrow we want to have an ability to be able to monitor submarines coming across from the Pacific to the Indian Ocean, or submarines operating in the Indian Ocean of other countries, we have to understand and know the hydrology very well. We need to have the means to be able to detect them. We need to be able to have the means to track them, which means unmanned autonomous vessels, seabed-based sensors, something like what the Brits used to have, or what NATO used to have, called the SOSUS in the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap, where they used to monitor Russian submarines, Soviet submarines coming into the Atlantic during the Cold War. So if we have to reach that level of capability, we need to cooperate with each other in understanding the intricacies of the underwater domain. And that requires a lot of scientific research and scientific activity. The UK has done a lot of work in unmanned underwater technologies. That means they have an understanding of that. Perhaps they're not familiar with the hydrology of this part of the world. But that is certainly something that, both countries should work towards, in seeing how can we improve our awareness of the underwater domain. From both a military perspective, as I mentioned, and also from a research and security perspective. Underwater cables, underwater infrastructure, offshore drilling, seabed mapping, resource extraction. There's no end to the potential that the underwater domain offers. And it's time we started looking at deep research in these areas. And if we can find a partner who can do it with us, who can provide us the means, who can provide us the technology, so much the better.
Well, what about an existing part? Because, well, India has already existing partnership with, one can say, Russia, France, Israel, and the US are today India's major defense suppliers. Now, does the UK really have anything that none of them would have?
Yeah, see, defense. So with UK, Israel, Russia, and France, we have what we call a very deep strategic relationship, which translates into a transfer of military hardware. We bought 20 billion of military hardware from the US. 36% of our military hardware comes from Russia. France is a major supplier of a lot of very important equipment. So is Israel. So why not UK? If UK can offer the kind of support, strategic support that these countries offer, and offer technologies that we can't get from other places, and they are willing to share those with us in this present scenario, where we want to not just get the technology, we want to understand the technology, we should be able to become Atmanirbhar or self-reliant, then it's definitely something the UK should be looking at. And if the UK is willing to share that kind of thing, I'm sure there's enough room for UK also to be a major player. You must understand one more thing that has changed. So in the last 3 years after the Russia-Ukraine conflict, what has changed is this shift in Europe, brought on by pressure from everybody about increasing the defense budgets. Now, if they're going to increase the defense budgets, they're going to place a lot more orders for military hardware on their own industry, whether it's their shipyards, whether it's their defense industrial complex. More pressure than on their large defense industrial complex is going to come on the ecosystem around it, the tier 1 vendors, the tier 2 vendors, the sub-suppliers, because these small companies may not have the capacity now to be able to meet the complete European requirement and still have extra capacity to offer to countries where European countries export equipment to. For example, India, or for example, Turkey, or for example, Greece, or wherever else. Now, countries like India, which are fairly technologically sophisticated, vis-a-vis many others, South Korea is another one, have the wherewithal and the technical expertise and the brains of amongst its people to become an alternate supply chain, to become an alternate supplier to the supply chain of these companies. And more companies are now looking at India for this purpose. So now when you find a foreign company coming to India to collaborate, he's not only looking to offer technology for that particular order which he has to execute, but he's also scouting around to seeing how these companies are delivering equipment, also scouting around to see if they can find good suppliers to plug into their global supply chain. So this is a win-win for both. It provides European companies the capacity, and it gives us, our young entrepreneurs, our industry, a window into the global market, a foothold into the global market, where they can showcase their skills and the quality of work they do. And believe you me, I have gone around many companies in India, because I work for a defense company, and we are doing exactly the same thing, looking for Indian partners. And there is amazing work happening in industrial pockets in various parts of the country. When we see these factories, they meet every possible international standard that you can think of, whether it's in terms of hygiene, whether it's in terms of the quality of their work, whether it's in terms of their quality processes, the refined workmanship, the skill set of the engineers, their R&D base. It's amazing to see what all is happening in the Indian industrial defense industrial complex. We just have to give them the opportunity to be able to break into the larger global market, and that is what this Russia-Ukraine war has provided that opportunity. Now we have to make the most of it.
The one more thing is, they talk about upgrading the existing 2+2 dialogue to the next, which is at a senior official level, to the next higher level. India already has this dialogue with Australia at a ministerial level. Is upgrading this dialogue really going to change anything on the ground, or it will just be more optics, upgrading it to ministerial level?
No, I think any dialogue, depending on the level at which it is held, carries weight, because depending on at what level it's being discussed, when the output or the outcomes of the dialogue are passed down the line, it depends on where it's come from. Has it come from a minister? Has it come from a joint secretary? Obviously. So, unfortunately, the Indo-UK 2+2 is still at joint secretary level, not even at the defense secretary level. Whereas over the years, we've established 2+2s with the US, with Japan, with Australia at the ministerial level, at the foreign minister and defense minister level. So I think it's time for this relationship to also look up. And I think perhaps part of this, this Vision 2035, perhaps this upgradation will happen in the next few years. Personally, if you really want to take this relationship forward, the way we are sort of talking about it now, certainly we need to upgrade the level of interaction at the governmental level. And ideally, I think if the UK indeed is going to be a major partner of ours, whether it's a free trade agreement or it's a technology security initiative, or it is the Defense Vision 2035, then I think a ministerial level 2+2 would be appropriate.
Right. So the last question I'd say before is, you see, whether we like it or not, anyone UK or anyone likes it or not, there is a bear in the room. India has very close ties with Russia. Now, there's no way India, for anyone's sake, is going to drop Russia. So how do you, this has been a constant concern of even of the select committees in their several outlooks and several reports that they've given. So how are both India and the UK going to navigate the Russia factor in this?
You're right. Russia has really become the bear in the room. There's no doubt about it. But I think, the Western countries have to be sensitive to the fact that India has been doing business with Russia for a long time. It's been a reliable and a trusted partner of India for a very long time, from the Soviet days. Of course, it's not the same relationship as it was with the Soviet Union. A little transactional element is there. So we're not going to drop them. That's one part of it. Secondly, 60% of our legacy equipment is Russian. We have to keep it going till the end of its life. So there is no choice for us but to go to Russia and retain that military relationship with them. Plus, we have also bought things like the S-400 from them now, which is a long-term thing. We're talking about the S-500. So I think there has to be a certain amount of sensitivity in the European capitals that this relationship will continue, but it does not impinge on India's strategic relationship with the West. In the sense that if you look at the US, now when Turkey, which is a NATO partner, bought the S-400, they imposed CATSA sanctions on Turkey. But when it came to India, there was bipartisan support for giving us the waiver. So obviously, they understand that we have this thing with Russia. Of course, it's a geopolitical thing. It works in America's interest to have us on their side in this part of the world. And really, if you look at the Indo-Pacific right now, or rather the Indian Ocean, the Indo of the Indo-Pacific, who other than India can these countries really count on as a reliable partner for security, for the safety of their trade, for their future markets, for their defense industrial complex, alternate sources of supply? It's India. So I think they all have to learn that, they have to understand they have to engage with India. India has its own compulsions. It is doing business with Russia. It is not letting that business interfere with what it's doing with the European countries. And look, till the Ukraine war happened, Europe was very happy doing business with Russia. In fact, they were very convinced that, this was the way ahead for Russia to bring them into the sort of mainstream. And perhaps, I don't know, perhaps when President Putin goes, things might change again. So I really don't know whether we should, European countries must understand that we have to do business. And I think France has come to terms with it. Israel has come to terms with it. The US has come to terms with it. So why not the UK? You mustn't forget, imagine at a time when the Cold War was at its peak in the early 80s, the Brezhnev-Reagan kind of environment where they were so touchy about small things. We bought the Kilo-class submarine and the 209 submarines at the same time. And we built the 209 submarines in India. So Germany allowed India that much technology to build its latest submarines of that time, despite the fact that we were really close to the Soviet Union at that time. And we were getting submarines at the same time from the Soviet Union. So why not now? That's one part of it. Secondly, if you look at the Indo-Soviet relationship or the Indo-Russian relationship, they have given us technology and equipment which nobody in the world has given to anybody else. There is not a single other instance of a lease of a nuclear submarine from one country to another. Even today, the Americans are hesitating whether they want to lease a Virginia class to Australia or not. And, they keep rocking the boat as far as AUKUS is concerned. So when you look at the depth of that relationship, it's something you can't just discard. And you have to sort of understand that this is something we have to live with, and both sides can live with it. Yes, we should also not sort of shove it in their face all the time. We should also be subtle about it. And I'm sure, if the other countries in Europe can come to terms with it, I'm sure so can the UK.
Okay, thank you, sir. I mean, it's been a very enlightening discussion, and I'd now throw the floor open. Whoever